This is AI Governance with Dr. Freddie Seba, a podcast and practical guide to AI oversight for boards and executive leadership.
All right, welcome to another episode of the AI Governance with Dr. Freddie Seba. And in this conversation, we talk to practitioners of AI who can help us go beyond all the marketing, all the buzzword, and all the research to see how they think, implement, and what they hear. So we are very lucky to have a good friend of mine who we worked together for a long time, Rohan Handa, who is now a deal maker at Mysten Labs, and he's also the Substrate newsletter author, dissecting systems that everybody uses, but few understand. It's an amazing newsletter that I follow and I read, and it's very apropos with what we're trying to learn now and discuss with him, which is how things work and what do leaderships and boards should think about and consider when talking about these systems, especially AI. So with that, I'll let Rohan introduce himself, introduce about the two organizations he is affiliated, and also tell us why listeners should listen to this episode. So again, welcome, Rohan. I know you're very busy, so I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely, Freddie. Delighted to be here. And I think this conversation couldn't be more timely with the rapid change that we're seeing almost on a daily basis. Often feels like an hourly basis, some new news break happening in the AI field and how it's impacting people, jobs, and how the productivity shift, the entire business models are shifting around this new reality. So very quickly as an introduction, my name is Rohan. I lead investments and partnerships as a deal maker at Mysten Labs, focusing a lot on AI and commerce, but a lot more focus in terms of where AI could benefit from the software stack that's being built using the Web3 infrastructure at Mysten Labs as well. And one of the things that benefits the listeners of this podcast would be when I often have these conversations, we tend to ask, like most people open an AI conversation with things like, okay, which model is best, right? I don't think that's the right conversation starter. And it's the least interesting question right now, in my opinion. So the real story really is AI is essentially becoming a cost curve shift. And what I mean by that, it's dropping the marginal cost of cognition and intelligence. So think like writing, summarizing, negotiations, reasoning, coding, customer interaction, all of it is being driven towards zero. So when the cost of something drops this rapidly, you don't get less of it. You tend to get way more of it. The content starts getting produced a lot more, and the output that you have in terms of writing creation becomes exponential. And that's what basically like Jevon's paradox is, if you're aware, if the audience might be aware of it. So I don't think the future is about AI will save money or will save productivity or things of that nature. The future, I believe, is AI will cause an explosion of output, an explosion of decisions, and an explosion of a demand for verification and governance. And that changes everything, how companies get built, how teams work together, how products compete, and how boards essentially think about it. So on the partnerships and go-to-market team around infrastructure, that's what I do. I work with teams to help build real systems, not just demos, especially as AI becomes the default interface for software. And if you're listening to this, and if you're a leader, founder, board member, I think the most important takeaway is that AI is not a future wave. It's not just another narrative. It's an economic wave. And economic waves reorganize industries at a very fundamental level. And that's exactly what we are seeing today.
Thank you so much for that intro. And so why should they listen to this episode?
Yeah, I think given my background in investing in partnerships, I I live at the intersection of technology. I live at the intersection of markets and what actually gets adopted by companies, by businesses. So I've spent a lot of time with founders and teams building on frontier tech. And recurring pattern is technology is really the bottleneck. It's the distribution, it's the incentives, the integration, and trust. I've launched multi-massive billion-dollar tokens in my lifetime. I've recently launched a decentralized storage protocol that enables storage for the AI era. So AI shows up in my day-to-day in two ways. One, like everyone, I use it constantly, writing research synthesis. But two, and more importantly, I'm watching how AI changes the economics of products and organizations. And I think if you are either threatened or have a FOMO or want to understand a bit more, I think this podcast is for you.
Thank you so much. So, what workflows can you go deeper? And again, let's keep it whatever you can share with our audience. So, what workflows do you see leadership concerned about, or thinking about, or working on?
Yeah. So right now, when you think about AI within larger organizations, things are still very chaotic, right? People are trying to experiment and plug in AI in ways that they think that will make things more productive. I don't think productivity is an issue there. So I'll give you a concrete example, right? So a lot of teams that I work with, or founders I talk to, even company internally here as well, like we use AI and ChatGPT and cloud softwares. So, as an example, a legal team, a paralegal who is now, redlining and correcting 50 legal documents or negotiate or the proposal documents. Previously, this paralegal was probably doing this in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever the case may be. Now that time has come down to I don't know, 3 days, 4 days, or even less in some cases. But it's eventually the legal is still the bottleneck there. They still need to review what the paralegal in this scenario has corrected. What are the things that have been redlined? So while you're increasing productivity in one area, that gets shifted and becomes a bottleneck for an entire organization. So the real value is hasn't really been realized at the organization levels yet because teams are shipping things without understanding the second order effects of it at the moment. So where the real value I'm starting to see is the creation of content, the dissection and the research aspect around deal making as an example. So previously I've talked to investors. I've been using the same as part of my job. I provide an input to any one of these frontier model chat GPTs or Claudes or Gemini, and I ask for very specific tasks to be done. And these products, these tools are much better at going out into the internet, collecting as much data as possible, organizing it, reorganizing it, and spitting out valuable information on which now I can actually take action. I can take decisions on. So that's what we're seeing. AI and these tools have gotten really good at, and which is very beneficial if this is the industry that you're really operating in. There's a lot of physical data that still needs to be consumed by these models to start having real life or physical impact on people's livelihoods, jobs, employments, or have meaningful impact as a whole.
Thank you for that. So, I keep hearing, so cost side is one thing, which is what you kind of understanding. How about the growth side? Because one piece is, can we cut costs and make, as you mentioned, somebody more efficient, but there is a bottleneck somewhere else. So how can we as leaders think about these tools, not only to cut costs and to move work around the organization, but also how can I get my organization to grow? In this case of the paralegal, can I use this tool to grow the number of customers I get, to get into other verticals? How do you think about these capabilities?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? So if you zoom out real quick, so the most active AI use cases right now aren't the sci-fi agent stuff. Oftentimes that happens in slow motion and all of a sudden it's like an aha moment. Where we are right now, it's the boring process improvement side of the house, right? So the biggest adoption is still very pragmatic. So think about internal knowledge search and management, your customer support side of the house, your sales enablement, as you mentioned, right? Developer productivity has really gone up. Compliance and monitoring, deal making, and investment research. These are the jobs that are currently getting impacted. And if you are an executive, a board member who is looking to implement AI to fast track or augment those capabilities, those can be done right now. Because the reason is very simple. These workflows, as I mentioned, they're already text heavy, repetitive, and measurable. So you can get productivity increases rather quickly by implementing AI tools in the right realm, right? I'm not saying that you deploy AI to kind of automate your entire process flow or whatever the organizational flow you may have in place. You got to identify the specific areas where AI can actually amplify and augment those. So again, customer support, I don't have to deploy too many humans, so that's cost cutting. Same thing with developer productivity. We are seeing this in real time. Your early software developers and engineers are not as much in demand, right? Because a lot of the baseline coding can be done by these models. So, so now bringing back to the cost curve aspect that you talked about. So the pattern is as AI makes output cheaper, companies again wouldn't stop producing. They produce more, right? So more content, more code, more customer interactions, more analysis, everything would be more. So in this scenario, the bottleneck essentially shifts. So the bottleneck now would become who's reviewing it, right? Who's going to be held responsible for the outcome of the work that these LLMs and models are producing? Who has verified that, right? Where's the verification check mark on this? Like, who do I hold? Because as humans, we'll still hold those things very dear, right? So we're not going to get that away. Although the number of people like doing that process, that reduces dramatically. So the oversight and ultimately the accountability. So the takeaway is like AI doesn't reduce work, it just moves work, right? So, and you'll create new opportunities as a result of.
Thank you. Let's go deeper on that. So, as a leader, thinking about these new technologies emerging, and you touch on FOMO, which in hype, and we see some of that going on there. But you talked about what are the barriers? I mean, where is the heavy lifting, in in your role as a business development person? I guess you in your interaction, you see, all of these leaders saying, is it integration? Is it deploying capital? Is it change management? What do you think is the heaviest lift these days?
So when you say heaviest lift, are you thinking it from a standpoint as to how do we implement these tools internally to fast track, or is it the new stuff that's coming off and that's raising more questions?
Yeah, I guess it's both. I mean, if I'm
Mhm.
sitting at the board, I went there every other month, I'm talking to my leadership, and I say, look, I keep hearing this, and I can see it in other boards that I'm sitting. And what is it that we're doing with AI and agentic AI or embedded AI, all of these cool technologies?
Yeah.
Um, how do you want them to think about where is the friction, and what things they should? Is it only a capital deployment when they say, okay, we're going to need to authorize more capital, or is it integration, or is it that people are going to be concerned about adopting that internally because um, they're going to lose their jobs? So, I mean, where do you see that friction and that heavy lifting
Yeah.
within adopting the technology?
It's not going to happen overnight. That's the short
Yeah.
punchline.
Okay.
Um, the way I see AI is almost on a spectrum, right? On one side, you have AI. Oops, my it zooms in rather quickly. On one side, AI is a tool, and on the other side, AI is an employee, right?
Mm.
And AI as a tool is moving very close to what an employee can do, right?
Mm.
And this is the world that we are driving towards, right? Because it's again, it goes back to my earlier points around who's accountable, who makes the decision, and all that stuff. In the current world, this employee is still responsible for it, but these agents are starting to take over, chip away at the edges, as you
Mm.
will, right? So if the world is moving from this agent as a tool to agent as an employee, let's keep that view in mind. And if that world becomes to fruition, it becomes life, then you need to start thinking about like how is this AI strategy going to impact my economics? Because unless you consider that very basic question, because employees are nothing but a cost center, right?
Mm.
And they need time offs, they need, take care, health benefits, all that good stuff. Agents has nothing. If it
Mm.
does well, it stays on. If it does not, you can actually delete that agent and replace it with something else, zero emotions attached. So if you treat AI as a feature, you'll get feature outcomes or tools
Mm.
outcomes. If you treat it as a cost curve shift or a potential employee replacement, you'll understand it's changing the entire competitive landscape, right? So if a leader asks, where does AI fit in my company strategy? You do one of these few things, right? So does it ask the questions around, does it increase revenue? Does it reduce cost? And does it reduce risk?
Mm.
But the more important point becomes AI changes the cost of actual execution because you don't have to give them offer letters, you don't have to negotiate with them. It's just, I got this for a very specific task, I'll execute it. So the competition will, along with you, will keep getting faster. Iteration cycles shrink dramatically. Customer expectations will rise, and companies that don't adapt in this world will get outpaced even if their product is good, right?
Mm.
So that is the world that we are all fighting towards. So both should stop asking, do we have an AI strategy or should we adopt? I think the question really needs to be asked and have concrete responses to is which parts of their current business are becoming cheap and which part is becoming scarce. So, and that is where you eventually implement AI. And yes, this will be a scary scenario for a lot of your listeners who are potentially employed by some of these companies who are looking at deploying AI. And the way to counter that is not to run away scared that, oh no, this is happening. It's about, we can dive deeper into it, as what I feel every person in this world will sooner than later become a prompt engineer. Even the best AIs would need someone who can help unleash the full potential of these agents and take control and guide them towards an end goal that is desired at the organizational level. And so it's very important to build those skills right now.
Excellent. Thank you. So you brought so much, and hopefully we can cover all of that. So you are a very technical person. You're an engineer with a master, top schools. So one of the things that I tell my audience is, we focus here on the non-technical piece, and you don't need a computer science or engineering or data science degree to engage with these technologies. So you're bringing it a little further. Say, look, everybody who's listening needs to critically engage with this technology, not run away, to quote you, because this is going to stay here. And you're kind of giving all of us some agency that it's up to us whether this transformation include us or we get basically disintermediated. So what I'm understanding, you're saying, look, don't fear it, change management. It is a challenge, but we can do something about it. We need to work on it, understand it. And again, you don't need to be a consumer scientist on it. So I do appreciate that on the leadership level and also on the employees level, because we want to make sure every technology is deployed and engaged in the humanistic way. So let's talk about risk now. You talked about, we started with cost and growth, but you're saying, wait, there is risk. And for somebody with your background, that especially on your newsletter, which I appreciate, you go to the things that we take for granted, the highways and the pipings and stuff. So how do we, as leaders, understand the things that we don't see at this technology, and how do we think about it on the governance side?
That's a very deep question. Maybe to address risk, I think it's important to understand like where the actual value signals first come from, because then we'll have a better appreciation for the risk in and of itself, right? Um, so right now, what's happening, and I see this on a day-to-day basis, is like the biggest trap is feeling like AI success is measured by its activity, right? Like people used it, these number of people chatted or like are doing this much output and all that. I think that is not real value. That is just a thing to do, like almost like it's emotion. So the real, I guess, the durable, quantifiable value really comes from when the cycle time of doing something goes down dramatically, right? Like doing a deal end to end instead of it taking 6 months because I have so many humans in between, I can reduce that to, I don't know, 6 weeks as an example. When the error rates go down, when you're debugging or coding something and you're able to go to production faster than you would otherwise, right? Then that's durable measure. Customer satisfaction goes up because my solutions are being found instantly instead of me having to be on a call with a customer support specialist for an hour at AT&T. No shade against AT&T, I use them, but it sucks to not be able to get an answer by the end of that 1 hour. Or an airline or whatever the case may be. People are redeployed to higher leverage work as a result. So if you don't see one of those getting improved or efficiencies going up, you just probably built or deployed some sort of a text generator, which is disguised as like AI, which is where most of the people find that they're not getting satisfactory result because they thought it would do something, but turns out it's not. So the second order effects were not studied at all. So the risk signals, what I'm seeing early warnings around are whether the trust decays, right? And then because it's a real problem through hallucination as an example. You deploy these model, expect a certain outcome, and you trust it now blindly. I mean, you often hear this and see this is like you're consuming a lot more, retaining a lot less. That means you're relying a lot more of whatever the output from these models are being generated without verifying whether they're true or not. So that verification governance aspect is missing as a layer at this point. So you are okay with those outputs, even if they're inconsistent. That's a risk because you're now training, along with collectively training the entire model as a collective humanity, we're training the wrong thing. And the data is completely wrong. So that becomes a massive risk. Or a team that cannot define what good looks like because the good now has multiple different outputs and no one is a clear decision owner of what good here is. That's a big risk for an organization. So your audit friction increases because you cannot prove anything. Instead of a black box, instead of a glass box, you have a black box, right? Because whatever goes in, it's there. How it generates, we don't know, but it looks good enough. So you make a decision and you see like quiet misuse of things, right? As a very basic example, uploading something that's confidential onto LLMs and then that gets exposed and comes out later. So those are some real big risk and big red flags. So when AI essentially becomes embedded in your decision making informally, right? Like people really start relying on it, but nobody officially owns it, right? Because it can give you the output, but if you start relying on the decision-making aspect and nobody's checking on the governance on how it's generating, where's the data coming from, and who's doing what, that becomes massive red flag, right? So, and I think this is one of the things I was talking about with one of my friends was the most dangerous AI is the AI nobody admits they're using,
Oh, interesting.
right? And you're starting to see elements of it. we all use AI for n number of reasons, but we
Mhm.
pretend we don't. So we are essentially the AI interface at the end of the day, that's relying on the same data that's being poured out to everyone. So I think that,
So you're talking a lot again. I love these conversations with you because you always bring so much richness. So again, going back, so we have FOMO, right? Which a lot of leadership are concerned. You also have how do we manage that? Now you add in more complexity, which is, well, how can we govern? I mean, if we don't know what our employees are using in higher education, is the whole thing about the students using AI and still, leaders and faculty, some faculty saying, well, we should try to clamp down, we should try to use AI detection, what have you. So um, I agree with you. Now we're all using that AI. So how do we think about it as leaders? And how do we make peace with the fact that we are in an AI mediated world, that commerce, especially, is just there, and that, again, your call, we need to engage. So, how do we go about thinking about it?
yeah, I think it again, I think a lot of what we have touched on, the framing that I've been using is for AI is exactly still the same, right? AI as a tool versus as an
Yeah.
employee.
Mhm.
Right? So as a board member, as an executive, the responsibility really becomes is like, where can I, understanding the workflow and the different business unit or processes that have been deployed across the organization, and really understanding where my current employee is acting as a tool versus a true value creator, right? If it's just a tool, if it's busy work, it's like repetitive work, that gets replaced by AI rather quickly, right? So again, the basic questions around efficiencies, cost cutting, revenue generation. I mean, we are seeing this in real time. Yesterday, I haven't dug deeper, but if you saw, so Cloud announced some new feature sets on its product, and which is making a lot of the SaaS companies very obsolete, right? Because they just have one interface which does all the things that like a Monday.com does or Salesforce does. Like, why do we need any of these things anymore? It's basically slashing down their revenue projections, slashing down their stock prices. So it's starting to have real impact on companies' bottom line. And when these impacts start affecting the bottom line, the first order of business for any executive is like, how do we shed costs? How do we cut costs? Who do we let go? Where are some of the biggest areas to reduce capacity? So now then the organizations could be different kinds. Some organizations are very product or technical led, other are more sales or business led, right? So if it's technical or product led, and that's kind of the primary driver, you need to maintain security, continue to push out protocols and stuff. In that organization, most of the deep cuts from an organization perspective that I'm noticing comes in the groups like marketing. It comes in the groups like
Mhm.
sales and development as such, because executives have decided that these developers are priced and we need them to continue to build products that are valuable, and we can replace the marketing and everything else through some of these newer tools that's coming out. Then on the other side, you have more of the companies that is more product business led, right? Instead of product and tech. So in that world, you have solid relationship. Everyone who's a deal maker, a business developer, or marketer, they have a massive network. So that's one thing that cannot yet be replaced is your personal connections and networks.
Mhm.
So I think those in real life connections will become even more prominent, and people will hire folks who have that massive network, because while all the back end work could be optimized or agentified, I guess, um, the relationships will not be able to, right? So in those
Mhm.
business-led world, you can launch a new feature using a product. So instead of having a 10-person product team, you maybe have a 2-person product team, right? But you need to amplify the marketing aspect. And a great example is like retail brands. They can use that a lot, right? They'll still need the buyers and the suppliers and the logistics and everything else in between, but they might not need UX designers or product designers who have been spending, who are not cheap, and require a lot more time to produce something, but can be replaced now easily by a Canva that has embedded AI tools in its backend, or some generative AI marketer who does a job better than humans would. So I think that that's kind of the distinction on the two kinds of organizations, and then again, tool versus an employee, and that's where the deepest cuts end up being, depending upon the organization you're operating or running.
So, thank you for sharing that. So, as a leader, how do we think about, again, going back to tool or an employee? So, how do we think about that in the context of security? You touch on security, and I mean, you have extensive expertise in that piece and access and who sees stuff, who doesn't. So, how do we think about those in risk?
Yeah. So basically, if I understand, so it's more around as we think about these tools and employees, um, at an organization level, what changes you'll start seeing in the roles and
Mhm.
responsibilities of people,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Yeah. So I think that's where it gets like super interesting. I've spent some
Mhm.
time, I wrote about this on one of my articles, which is like
Mhm.
the organizations are about to get super weird, right? Because right now AI sits in this very uncanny valley between, as we talk about, tool employee.
Yeah.
It does work, but it doesn't have accountability yet, right?
Mhm.
Memory is not persistent across the board. The outputs are not, right? Again, that black box versus glass box thing. So orgs and especially executives and these board will start creating new roles and structures, in my opinion. I could be completely wrong on this, but this is how I view the world kind of
Mhm.
evolving. So bear with me. So I think things like people who are managing AI agents, so like AI wranglers is a term that I really like, right? You have animal and cow wranglers, bull wranglers. You'll have AI wranglers who know exactly where to whip, how to whip, and how to control that. People who end up evaluating those AIs, right? So now your security risk, like, okay, I have deployed this AI agent. Now, do I, as a human, know exactly how it's supposed to work? Provide those report updates all the back up to the organization,
Mhm.
and now I become the responsible party if that agent does not work as intended, right? Then people who handle incidents. Sometimes, for whatever reason, these things will go off the radar and do wonky stuff. So you need people who still kind of handle those incidents. And then you have people who design workflows around them. And I think that is super critical, because, as I said, like everything is very chaotic right now. And I might be over exaggerating, but maybe 0.1% of the world has come to grips with AI and the impact it has, mostly in the tech field, who are bringing these things to life. 99.9% of the world still operates in a world which is very human to human interaction, right? So the opportunity really is for people who understand these systems, because they will be called on to deploy these systems and set up these functions that I described above, in a unique fashion, right? So maybe the McKinseys or the Ernst and Youngs of the world will start printing money again, because now they become the frontier consultants and advisors for these one-person, two-person companies, but who need some of these specialized individuals and employees to run these agentic workflows. So that is sort of a short to midterm prediction, but this may all become automated, but I think we'll have AGI by then if that ends up happening. And you'll see a shift where execution becomes cheap, right? Orchestration and judgment becomes scarce, and that's what we we're talking about. So it's less about organization flattening. So it'll just be new layers with new titles and more efficient, just lesser humans in the loop.
So, what else is happening on the substrate level, um, pun intended, that leaders should be aware without being computer scientists or engineers or data scientists? What else should they be aware? They need to understand, because again, there is a lot of hype out there, and leaders get in touch to either consultancies who want to sell their gear, I mean, their consulting services, or vendors or partners, whatever you want to call them, promoting their gear. So, how can they get an what is it that they need to know from a practitioner like yourself about things that they should be asking or should be concerned? They should be, especially boards, every time they meet with leadership, what is it that they should be asking that they're not?
Yeah. I think leaders would very much be held accountable for knowing their processes and their business unit and their teams inside out, because sooner than later they'll be asked and tasked to replace humans in the loop with these AI tools and agents in between, right? So the best question these leaders could really ask is, where is AI in production? What are the best tools and or frontier models that are already in the market that can actually solve certain problems within the value chain that exists within my organization? What decisions does it end up influencing, right? And what's the failure mode? Because at the biggest role of any CEO or a leader is minimizing risk, because that
Mhm.
ends up optimizing